Hi, I'm Rachel Dillon, and together with my husband, Marcus Dillon, we lead Who's Really the Boss podcast, where we highlight the joys and challenges of running a business with your spouse or family. Our mission is to strengthen families and businesses by helping listeners avoid the mistakes we have made so they can lead and live happily ever after. Welcome back to another episode of Who's Really the Boss podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Welcome back to town. Do we start every episode with welcome back to town? Do you ever stay home?
I love to travel. I love to get frequent flyer miles and stay in nice hotels. So any good trip that I can say that is a good trip. It's good to be back though. Miss y'all, miss the house, especially when you're not traveling. So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were at a conference that you needed to be at because the topics that they were going to discuss just felt so relevant, so close to what we do, just to help us be better with our clients, with our peers in the accounting industry. And so you went, but I stayed behind because Avery, our youngest, had a swim meet and I didn't want to miss the swim meet.
Yeah.
And
I missed a swim meet, so it's like...
I also timed that swim meet. It was like 3.5 hours with one break. It was a lot. But you got upgraded on everything.
Huge.
At the traveling to and traveling from this conference. So tell a little bit about your experience of that, but also tell a little bit about the conference.
Yeah. So, let's start with the upgrades, right? So I'm spoiled, and whenever we now go to the airport, we park in valet just because that is the most convenient. And so pulling into valet and then going through clear TSA pre-check to then go to the United Club Lounge if we're flying out United. And then, we get upgraded to first class pretty regularly. So that was no different on this trip. So upgraded to first class. And then whenever I actually got to the hotel, it was a little bit later in the day there when I got there to Greenville, South Carolina. The hotel was so nice. And they upgraded me to a suite. And the suite had a living room and a kitchenette and a table, and great. This is all for me. It's like Kevin McAllister when he goes to New York. It was pretty nice.
Yeah. And I feel like we need to give some context there because that does sound awfully privileged. However, there were a few things that we put in place too many years ago to count, with like the Amex Marriott Bonvoy, to where we could stay at nice hotels after we finally built up enough status and points and whatever. And then the traveling, just going a lot for business, some with kids going, across the world for college. And so just some of those things, not necessarily that we're like laying down cash for all of these nice upgrades. It took a few years to build up to this point that now we get to, in our old age, we get to enjoy some of the nicer things.
I'm still an accountant by nature when it comes to some things. So it's funny, I was talking to a new client and first-time business owner and kind of giving him the rundown on the benefits of credit cards and credit card miles. This is anti-Dave Ramsey, right? But I kind of looked like an addict because I had like 5 or 6 different credit cards that I use intertwined into the daily life of owning a business or different investments. And so was giving him the rundown on each. So Amex Platinum, Marriott Bonvoy Amex, United Club card, all that fun stuff. That's what allows us entry points into these upgrades.
I appreciate you for that. I feel like you might appreciate me for the fact that you cannot have a credit card if you cannot pay it off every month.
Oh, yeah.
It has to be paid off every single month. There are no balances carried on anything. So that's one of the stipulations of having so many things. But I do like to travel. And when I travel, I feel like it needs to be nicer than home, or it's more like camping. And I don't prefer camping. And so anyway, all of that to say, Tell me about the conference that you went
Yeah.
to. What were the topics discussed?
So it was the first time at this conference, and my friend Jason Blummer leads a group called Thrival. It's a accounting community, membership community, and every year they have this conference called Deeper Weekend, and it's in Greenville, South Carolina. It's where he and his team are based out of. So the topic this year was merge, sell, acquire, and scale. And so each of those 4 topics, like the agenda looked great, different panels from industry thought leaders and just real world experience on people that have been successful in any one of those 4, what to think about as you are integrating a firm in or looking for a firm to acquire or sell your firm, or even scale, which is a lot of what people are trying to do right now, and get through the season that we're in from an accounting industry, because the amount of available work is high, and you just have to be careful with what you do let into the doors and do that the right way. So scale was a very big topic. So that was what led me to the conference. And then kind of as I was sitting there listening to one of the panels on M&A, I started to write down how many M&A transactions we've been involved in. And so when I text you, I'm like, hey, we should do a podcast on what we've learned from 12 different M&A transactions. You're like, this sounds like a fish story. So
I absolutely said that. Like, when you tell the fish story, the fish gets a little bit bigger every single time.
yeah,
Because I think in my mind, I could say 8. I could point back to 8 for sure. My mind is not as good as it once was,
Yeah.
pre 40 years old. So I do appreciate that. You're winning all kinds of points, not from rubbing it in my face that you had all the upgrades, but from bringing a podcast topic that never happens. So the fact that you're bringing that was awesome.
Well, yeah, and that was the thing. I was listening to people share their experience, and I'm like, that's great advice. I wish I would have known that before this deal or that deal. And then that's when I started jotting them down. So we really have done 12 M&A transactions within the start of DBA since 2011. So 4 of those were acquisitions, and 8 were divestitures or client block exits that we monetized. So crazy to think, 12 different M&A transactions since 2011.
So it is. It really is.
And so to give everybody a little bit more context, the 4 acquisitions happened all prior to 2016 was the last acquisition. And then that's when we kind of reached critical mass. This is no longer fun. 2017, we immediately started divesting, blocking clients, grading clients, blocking them, and then selling them when the opportunity was available to sell them. So 4 acquisitions up to 2016, 8 sales since 2017 to 2022.
Yeah, so let's put this disclaimer in there. Those acquisitions were all happened within the first 5 years of business ownership. We were very young at that time compared to what we are now. So talk a little bit about, what did due diligence, if any, look like as you were acquiring or thinking about acquiring those firms?
So I think the first 3 happened really quick, right? So the first one was the original client block that started DBA. I've told that story a few different times, where we went out and got a loan, $400,000 block of clients, Bob St. Jean. It was just everything that I felt that I could do on my own, and continue to work at the pace that I was. So that was the initial acquisition.
And
so
it was in a location that
we wanted,
already lived or worked near our house.
Between our house and the greater Houston area. Yeah. And so it was somewhere we wanted to be long term. So all that due diligence was probably the most intense on that one. And so, we wrote a business plan, had to go in front of like a loan committee or loan broker that would advocate on our behalf for this loan. Did the deal with our attorneys, his attorneys, all that fun stuff. And even then, like, I look back at that deal, we were 28 at the time, and so much could have gone so wrong, but it didn't. And so thankful for that. So the next kind of deal that happened was another very small acquisition of a friend of ours who had started a small private practice in a town that was further rural and wanted to actually move out further rural if you would have ever let me. And so it was kind of that opportunity to play in that space. And we took over his office, acquired his client base, and it was very friendly. I was already doing some work to assist him in those early years whenever he really shifted focus from private practice to go back into a corporate environment. And so we acquired that one. And then the third one in 2011 was where my former firm, the firm that I had left, I had worked for 5 or 6 years before starting DBA and buying that first block of clients. So much work followed me, and I signed a non-compete, non-solicitation. And as part of that, any work that followed me, I had to pay for. So that was my third acquisition in 2011 that I had to pay for those clients that followed me, a third, and make right by those clients and work through that with my previous boss, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So those three were pretty much immediate. And then the fourth, that had a little bit, that came a little bit later, had a little bit of thought into it. Talk a little bit about that one.
Yeah, I would say a little bit of thought. That's the one that we acquired my mentor's practice. And so that's in a town 25, 30 minutes away. It gave us a second office location. We thought we were doing the right thing there. There's still fruit that came out of that transaction. That's the one that I wish I would have done a little bit more due diligence on, just from a culture perspective of the client base and what those clients wanted from their CPA relationship. And so that individual, he's still a mentor of mine, still a really good friend. We came away from breakfast one day saying, what's the worst, or I said, what's the worst that could happen by merging these two practices or acquiring these practices? Kind of gave him that succession plan event for him to exit and kind of do his own thing. But that was probably not all the due diligence that was needed on that one, because the client base was just so different. And we were already on this path of client accounting services. It was not called that at that time, but doing more for clients through outsourced accounting. And that client base was definitely not that. And so we kind of took a detour in 2016, and it's all good. It all worked out. What it actually did, looking back, is it allowed us to reach a certain revenue point to then begin to fill out the team that was needed to maintain that revenue point and just give us additional budget for better team members going forward than what we were doing on an organic path.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a lot of good. There was a lot of learning that came out of that. And so, what do we say? It's not a failure. It's like a lesson.
Yeah.
So,
it's going to make for a great story.
It does. And you know what? We'll never forget those years. There are years that feel like they're hard to remember, like the time just flew past. But there are certain years that we can remember pretty much every minute of that year and the pain. And so you can look back, and now we can laugh at those.
Yeah.
But it also started, I guess, the divestures season. Once we realized what clients don't fit our ideal client profile, don't fit the ideal services we would like to provide, and even don't prefer the way that we provide those services. So at that point, we could start looking at, okay, who doesn't quite fit with DBA anymore?
Yeah. So I remember the tax season of 2017, we had merged the two together or acquired. It wasn't a merger, it was an acquisition. So I remember in 2017, just the volume that we had. And I remember we still had like paper files going through the office. We were at the first office location that we built there in Katy. And I remember just stacks and stacks and stacks of like folders. And I think they only had like a routing sheet in them.
Yeah.
And it was just too many, right? And from a CPA that's seasonal, they would route through my office when I would review them and then kind of go up to the front as part of like the client delivery and then come back to me whenever to invoice them. And so I had a stack for review, I had a stack for invoice. And this is where we were, like, it was so crazy. I couldn't send invoices because I had to do review. So it's like the thing that you celebrate the most, like sending an invoice and getting cash, like couldn't do that, right? Because we just had too many clients. So that that season triggered, like, we just have way too many clients. I also got everybody on the team to buy into that, regardless of what they knew what that meant. It just was not a fun time to be at DBA.
Do you
And
remember? This is random, but do you remember at nights we would go home, put the girls to bed, and then go into our home office and work? Do you remember what we would watch
I
at
think
night?
the OJ trial
was.
movie, not the OJ trial, but it was like the one with David
OJ.
Schwimmer as like the Kardashian.
That's what I
Yeah.
remember most from
Yeah.
that time. There are some other things about it that I
Cuba
remember.
Gooding Jr. was OJ, I think. Yeah.
But I just remember going back home, working for, I don't know, maybe till midnight, 1, 2 a.m., and watching the OJ trial movie
Yeah.
every single night, starting it up. Okay, where are we?
Yeah.
Go
On A&E. So the other sad thing that I have on my video, I have a video of me putting Avery, our youngest, to bed. And it had to be during this season of life. And just a frustrated parent, probably trying to get back to the office to do work, because then I knew I could go to sleep after I knocked out so much work. But this kid, this young child, was in my way, like to not do that. So I was in charge of putting her to bed, brushing her teeth, and complete meltdown of the child. And that's all captured on video. And so while it's funny, it's kind of not. It's really sad. You hate that video, even though we all kind of.
I don't laugh at that video.
Even
I
though we all
cringe and
kind of,
cry.
yeah, the rest of us kind of are like, oh, look at this like meltdown happening, because like demon child at that point, because it was so late, frustrated. But thinking back, like how bad was that you're trying to put your kid to bed so you can go back to work. And that's just like things like that kind of built to where we said, no more. This is not what we intended to build, even through these acquisitions. Because like the acquisitions were one thing, but organic growth over that 5 years was also really good to us. And so we had reached this critical mass. I think revenue was around 2.2 million at that time. We had a fairly large team for most firms, what we would consider a large team. But we just had so many client relationships. It was over 2,000 at that time. So we had to make the decision to start blocking and selling, really just blocking and exiting. And then my mentor had been successful in actually selling client blocks. So I took that playbook from him as well and learned that, and did that now 8 times through last year.
Yeah. So let's talk through the practical of what that looks like, because there are people involved in that process. So clients that, depending on your business model, you may know very well,
Yeah.
or clients who think they know you very well because you're their CPA, even though they are your one of 2,000 potentially. Sure. So what does that really look like when you start to think about, well, first, how do you even pick the clients that you're going to get rid of? What's the first step there?
Yeah, and I think the main thing there is it's not just the PETA clients, the pain in the butt clients. Mm-hmm. Those people are gone. Like, whether they treat a team member disrespectfully or me disrespectfully or just a pain to deal with, like those people, we don't want to refer them on to anybody. And so they're just gone. After you've kind of got past that, you actually look to see who you enjoy working with. So you would grade them 1 through 4, A through D, however you want to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's people that you're serving, that you enjoy serving in a way that you want to serve them, is A, clients. B is people that you enjoy, but you're not serving them how you want to serve them. They're actually your B clients. And then C is people that you really don't enjoy serving, but you're serving them in the manner that you want to serve them. They're C. And then D, you're not serving them the way you want to serve them, and they're not your ideal client. Those are D. So
Where does highly profitable clients fit in that list?
it depends, right? So it's like,
Yes.
you don't have to do everything all at once. You can hang on to those really, hopefully you enjoy those clients, right? And so we've kept high margin services or client relationships through the long haul. But grading those clients A, B, C, D is usually what we would do. And then
I think it was good that you touched on the point that an A client is not only a high margin client.
oh no,
And
yeah,
there have been a lot of high margin clients that don't want the services that we now offer or don't want to do business the way that we do business. A few, because we did this in steps. We didn't want to hurt the business in any way. We didn't want to lose team members in any way by doing this. We wanted to keep all of the team members that we have, and the business to continue to be profitable through the transitions. So we did keep some high margin clients, but they weren't necessarily ideal fits. And within the next time that we graded clients and thought about doing the next divestiture, they were first ones on the list because they stuck out so badly after we
Yeah.
had removed the ones that didn't fit. So I think that's really important, is that you don't necessarily have to look at that list of just who are my most profitable. Okay, they stay no matter what. That's not the right mindset to have when thinking through this.
Yeah, so that's a great point. We kept those kind of isolated. We still graded those as well because it's, and they wouldn't always fall in A because maybe we're not serving them
Right.
how we want to. So they may be a C client.
Right.
So, but we would start with the D, and how many Ds can we afford to exit? And every time we did a divestiture, it was always exit without the intention of recovering any income. And so that was the thing, like our initial client block sales, the first two that happened in the first year that we did this in 2017, I think we're about $75,000 to $100,000 each. So it made up $150,000 to $200,000 in total client exit. And with that, it was not any cash up front. It was, we went to two different CPAs and said, well, they reached out to us and said, we would like to grow more. And so we referred them work, but then they also said, well, how can we also grow faster? And I'm like, well, we've got some clients. So we actually took those two blocks to two different CPAs, and whatever they collected year one was the purchase price. So in their side, they didn't have to give any type of compensation to us for that first year. They got to collect all of that fee income, and that's what set the purchase price. And then based on that, the next 3 years, that purchase price that was agreed upon was paid out. And so that worked well in that situation. The very next year,
Did you say how you identified those
CPAs?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one had reached out. We've always done a good job of knowing our peers in the markets. And so one of those was in the market where the second office that we acquired was, and then the other one was actually a friend who left a larger firm that started a firm, and we actually subleased space to her as well. So she just, unlike any other CPA, she reached out and said, hey, I'm not as busy as I'd like to be. And, famous last words on that. So those were the first two. And we identified that just through pure connections. Mm-hmm. The next one was actually the spouse of a former employee who left a firm and wanted to start his own firm. He was doing both financial planning and CPA. And so with that, it got to the point where my mentor was fully retiring from that type of work, and we had to make a decision. Do we go in and staff that other office and kind of double down, or is this the time to spin that off and exit? And we chose the latter and said, okay, we're going to spin this off and the client base that is tied to that location. And with that, it gave that other young person an opportunity to go office in there and do all of that. So that was about a $250,000 transaction. That one was, he went and got a loan very similar to my initial start at DBA. And part of that went to me, a very small part, but also part of it went to my mentor that took a small subset of clients back. And that's actually the fourth divestiture, is that mentor of mine took some clients back. And so he had to pay for those clients of what we had given consideration of. So that was 2018. And then in 2019, one of those CPAs that subleased a space from us, she got another client block, and then smaller still, maybe 50 or 75,000. So they're not big numbers, but it allowed us cash runway to continue to shift the focus of the firm, not accept clients that weren't a good fit, and kind of give us just pure operating capital to continue to bring on the right people as we grew the client base. And so in 2020, in the midst of COVID, we had a team leader leave, and we had an audit practice or a test practice that, same thing, similar to the office. Do we double down and really start to grow that, or is it a time to exit that service line? And so at that point, we said, we don't want to go through peer review any longer. I was already out of a test game. I didn't want to step back into it. So at that point, we found a regional firm that wanted to come into our market, and we provided this larger base of clients, which was 400,000, the same amount that I started DBA with as far as the first acquisition. We sold off in 2020 to that regional firm. And so that one got a down payment, payments over 4 years based on client retention. That wasn't our best deal, by the way. And so that was more of a real estate play for us, because they were able to come into our market, sublease part of our office building, are still there today, which works great from a real estate perspective. But from a client sale deal, their retention has been different than other smaller CPA firms. They're just not as motivated, maybe, to kind of retain some of those clients. And we've felt that every year on the payouts of that original agreement that we agreed to.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what communication looked like with the first divestitures versus the communication with that particular divestiture?
It was night and day. And so it was the smaller single solo CPAs were so invested, whether it was a $50,000 block or $250,000, like they were all in. It was their client base. Like it was their road to success to make sure that these clients transitioned. The other side of that, when it was a much larger firm, they really didn't have any incentive to, like, whoever came to their firm. They really didn't. They may say different, but and we're still friends with them too. Hopefully they don't listen to this, but it was just, there was no incentive other than what my payout was going to be. So they saw, like, I should be doing more. And I'm like, they're not my clients anymore. Like, we did everything the same. We sent out letters, phone calls, made introductions. It just kind of fell flat whenever it went to the larger firm.
Yeah. I think that was the big thing, that we did the same each time as far as communicating with those clients that would be transitioning of, hey, we no longer offer the services that you were used to receiving at our office. Here are people who do offer these services. We know them. We are working with them through your transition closely, gave all of their contact information, said that they were ready and waiting for their call or email.
Yep.
And then we did that same thing. But those first acquisitions, those owners reached out to those people as soon as. So, if they were copied on the email, they responded to the email for every single one of those clients. If they hadn't heard from somebody on their list, they proactively reached out way prior to tax season. Whereas with the second one, they didn't even reply to the emails that they were copied on. They did not reach out to anyone that they hadn't heard from. And I don't know that they had a point person in their office to help with the transition as far as getting documents or following up with anyone, because a lot of messages, even just simple questions in response to their letters, would go unanswered for days or weeks. We would step in and try to help open up that door of communication, but it still wasn't there. And really, that wasn't that wasn't anyone's fault. It was more of how the deal was written, where it really was on us as the ones needing to be that were more motivated to make the transition work versus them. It was like, it's good if it does. It doesn't matter to us if it doesn't. So
Right. Yeah. And it also, something we've learned on the other side of that is they don't need more clients.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those like capacity is full plus. And so the fact that that's the one difference with them versus all the others, that they don't have capacity for more clients.
And we didn't realize that
We did
ahead
not.
of time. We
Yeah.
kind of saw, maybe we're a little bit jaded by the sheer number and size of the firm and thought, well, if we can do this with our very small firm compared to them, then they should have plenty of capacity, and they're asking for it. So there's also that.
And they're paying for it.
And
right?
they're paying for it. So
Yeah.
I think that we were just a little bit in the dark maybe on what actually would happen.
Correct. So just because they're a bigger buyer doesn't mean they've got it figured out. And so going back, 2020 that happened, 2021, that was our third client sale to that same CPA who subleases space from us. She wanted to continue to grow, her and her partner. So we did another one of those in 21. And then in 2022, we went back to her for potentially the fourth time. She said, no, I'm good. So we said, hey, that's great. And on that last one, which happened in 22, we actually, like, that was a good block. And after doing this 8 different times, like, the people are good people, right? Like, so these A, B, C, D, like, you're continuing to grade based on that methodology, A, B, C, and D, but your Ds are so much better people than whenever we started that in 2017, like, just great all around, very profitable engagements. So we put together a block of about 150,000 of work. It was about 100 relationships, 100 returns. So really good, average price point. And because we really didn't have a peer in the market who we knew we could go to, we actually listed it with a broker and got a nice multiple on that, 1.2, found a buyer, found multiple buyers for it, but ultimately went with one that was down the street. Worked really well for them because while they weren't meeting in our conference room and keeping our same address like some of the previous client blocks, they were just down the road. And so that was the other thing that was easy for people that wanted that local presence, which that's kind of what we got down to is now that we've moved more virtually in this, post-COVID environment, if somebody needed an office location and they weren't one of those high margin A, B, or C clients, then that's kind of what made up the decision to get them to somebody who's going to serve them in a local presence, in a local market. So every time we've done this, it just comes down to not good or bad person, it's good or bad fit. And that good or bad fit is where we're at today or where we are going as a business. And so that's everything we've done in grading. And I know we've touched on that a few different times. But as we recap, like, the lessons learned over these 12 different M&A transactions, number one, due diligence is key. And so both on the buyer side and on the seller side, I raised my hand that on some of the transactions, I did too much due diligence, and on others, I didn't do enough. And now it's just having that experience going through both that I know probably the right amount to do and what really matters most. So due diligence is key. The second item is communication is key. And so communication, whether you're buying firm, selling clients, whatever that is, communication has to be clear between the two parties that are doing the deal. So the two firms or the buyer and seller, and then also the clients. If you're selling, you have to give them a reason why. Nobody loves to be broken up with, but you also have to make the right introductions, support that introduction along the way to make sure that that is a successful transition. And our success rate on these transitions are anywhere from 75 to 85, 90% probably as far as landing, because where else are they going to go?
Yeah. Well, it's so much better. And we've talked about this before, when you are broken up with from any type of business relationship, it's so much better to have a recommendation of who to go to, even at the end of the day, if you don't go to that person, but you talk to that person and you can see, okay, I liked this about my previous CPA. I don't care for this about this CPA. At least you have a little bit more of what to go off of, like, no, that's not what I want. And you can go find someone else. But it feels awful when you have to start with a blank page of like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to Google and
Yeah.
starting to call every single person that comes up until I find somebody that's either taking new clients or that I feel like, hopefully in a better situation, I feel like I can communicate well with. So, yeah, so much better to at least have somebody to go to as a recommendation.
Yeah. And then the final kind of lesson in that is just flexibility is key. So even though the attorneys or the brokers require things to be written a certain way, as long as you have good communication, good rapport with the seller or the buyer, remaining flexible just so there's success rate in the deal, I think is the other piece where these 4 acquisitions, these 8 divestitures we've done are all a little bit different, and so I think it's just being flexible to achieve the goals of both parties, and no deal is the same. So that's the piece where it all comes down to the due diligence, communication, and flexibility with the lessons that we've learned in those 12 M&A deals.
Yeah. And just before we wrap up, what would you say from a seller's perspective, from our perspective? Which deal felt the best, or what were some of the benefits of the deals that we did on our own? Say that we sold those 3 client blocks to the same person over a couple of different years versus the one we sold with the broker.
Yeah, so I think the broker and then the one we did in 18 where that was cash up front. So, cash up front's nice. And there's going to be a lot more due diligence on those cash up front deals from the buyer's perspective, a lot more requirements from the bank, assuming they're going out to get a bank note. So those were nice. The trust that we have with the person who keeps buying client blocks from us, that's nice too. So they actually don't like to carry debt. So after year 1, after that purchase price is established, they usually stroke a check for that amount because they don't like that, even though they have all ability to stretch that out over 3 years, but they just cut us a check and don't care to pay interest. And so that's worked out really, really nice. But I will say, if you're thinking about doing this in your firm, make it a reasonable acquisition for somebody. So don't feel like you have to build like a $400,000 block or $1 million block of clients. Our best ones have been the $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 blocks because the buyer can typically not have lending, not have leverage to come to the table and acquire those. And so you can get a nice chunk down front. That way they have sweat in the game, which we would always recommend, whether that's a lot of cash, like 90%, or if it's 25%, just you need some equity. And then what you do there is you set a floor. So if it's going to be a 90% floor or lower, we would also want that on the upside, because if they actually grow that book of business or you send a bunch of referrals over that way, that should also adjust the purchase price, on the other side of it. So a lot of flexibility in that.
I think that that's been kind of a side benefit or a secondary benefit, is that because we do have ideal clients and we don't really stray from that in accepting new work, these divestitures have opened up the door for us to have multiple places to send clients who call or prospects who call that don't really fit our services or our model. And so that's also nice, is to be able to say it's so much easier to stick to, no, we don't serve that type of industry, or we don't serve that type of client, or we don't do that service, when you can refer them to someone that is good, that is going to take their call or respond to their email, respond to their call. So that's always nice as well. You just continue to build that network of, extra referrals when maybe you can't perform the work that's someone's calling about.
Yeah, I would just say that's the biggest piece. If you're the seller and looking for a buyer, confirming that they have capacity for those clients, because that's going to make success a lot easier.
Well, I'm glad that you made good on your story and that it didn't end up being like an over exaggeration, that you really could point back to all 12 deals that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'm okay being wrong in that case. And so
Hey, 12 deals in 12 years is
that's
also
right.
what that happens. So, what are we going to do this year? I guess
Oh
is the
no.
next thing.
Oh no.
So,
We're gonna rest. We're
all
gonna take
right.
a break.
All right. All
This
right.
has been a good conversation.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for hanging with us to the end of another episode. Leave us a review with your thoughts, comments, and feedback on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Join us again next week for another great conversation.